Have you ever wondered why the Soviet Union sold Alaska to America? A question that might seem simple on the surface, yet it's laced with a rich tapestry of history, politics, and economic strategy. It's a tale that dates back to the 19th century, a time of grand empires and bold explorations. But why is this topic relevant today? Because understanding our past helps us make sense of the present. The sale of Alaska is not just a transaction between two nations, it's a story of foresight, negotiation, and, some might argue, a stroke of luck. This historical event also carries a hint of mystery. Was it a mere real estate deal or was there more to it? Did the sale yield any profit or benefit to the Americans? Answers to these questions have profound implications that continue to echo in our world today. So, today, we delve into this historical event, unearthing facts and debunking myths. Before we dive into the actual sale, let's take a step back and understand the early days of Alaska. The story of Alaska begins long before the Russians or Americans set foot on its rugged terrain. The land was home to a rich tapestry of indigenous cultures for thousands of years. These communities, such as the Tlingit, Haida, and Aleut, thrived off the land's abundant resources, creating a vibrant mosaic of cultural traditions. In the mid-17th century, Russian explorers began to venture east, drawn by the allure of untapped resources and the promise of new territories. The first recorded sighting of Alaska by a Russian was by Semyon Dezhnev in 1648, but it wasn't until a century later, in 1741, that the first scientific expedition, led by Vitus Bering and Alexei Chirikov, truly opened Alaska to Russian exploration. The Russians were attracted by the rich fur resources, particularly sea otters, and they established a series of outposts across the region. The most significant of these was on Kodiak Island in 1784 by Grigory Shelikov, a fur trader. This settlement, which later became the Russian-American Company's headquarters, marked the beginning of Russia's formal presence in Alaska. The indigenous populations and the Russian settlers had a complex relationship, marked by periods of conflict and cooperation. The Russians, however, were never able to fully colonize Alaska. Their presence was mainly concentrated along the coastline, and their numbers were relatively small, never exceeding a few thousand. The Russian-American Company, a semi-private organization similar to the British East India Company, controlled Alaska. The company was granted a monopoly over trade in the region by the Russian crown and became the de facto government in Alaska. However, maintaining these distant outposts soon proved to be a significant financial burden for the company and, by extension, the Russian government. And so, the stage was set for the decision that would forever change the course of Alaska's history. The Russian-American Company, a semi-private organization, controlled Alaska, but the costs of maintenance soon became a burden. The costs were mounting and the benefits seemed to be dwindling for the Russians. In the mid-19th century, Russia found itself in an increasingly precarious economic situation. The country was cash-strapped, and its far-flung territories, including Alaska, were proving to be more of a burden than a boon. The vast Alaskan wilderness, while rich in resources, was difficult and expensive to manage and protect. The Russian-American Company, which had been granted a monopoly over trade in Alaska, was also struggling financially. But it wasn't just the economics that led to Russia's decision to sell. The geopolitical landscape was shifting. The Crimean War that took place from 1853 to 1856 had revealed Russia's military weaknesses to the world. The defeat they suffered at the hands of an alliance of the Ottoman Empire, France, Britain, and Sardinia was a bitter pill to swallow. More than that, it had exposed the vulnerability of their Alaskan territory. If another war were to break out, Russia feared it would be unable to defend Alaska against a potential British attack. The idea of losing Alaska without any compensation was a scenario that the Russians couldn't bear to contemplate, so they began to consider the unthinkable, selling Alaska. But who would buy this vast, remote, and largely undeveloped territory? The United States, a young nation on the rise, seemed like the most likely candidate. America had already demonstrated its appetite for expansion with the Louisiana Purchase and the annexation of Texas. Moreover, Russia believed that having the United States as a neighbor in the north could help counterbalance the power of their British rivals. So, the wheels were set in motion. The Russian minister to the United States, Eduard de Stokel, was instructed to open negotiations with the American government. The Russians were willing to sell, but would the Americans be willing to buy? The decision was made, Alaska was to be sold, but to whom? America, a growing power, seemed like the perfect buyer. As the young nation expanded and flourished, the prospect of acquiring such a vast territory was hard to resist. The man who championed this acquisition was none other than the United States Secretary of State, William H. Seward. Seward, a man of vision, saw the potential that Alaska held. Despite the region being largely unexplored and undeveloped, he believed that its natural resources and strategic location could greatly benefit America. Thus, he embarked on negotiating the deal that would forever change the face of the United States. The negotiation process was no easy task. The Russians, despite their eagerness to sell, were shrewd negotiators. They understood the value of Alaska and made sure they got a fair price for it. The final agreed amount? A cool $7.2 million. In today's terms, that's about $123 million. Quite the bargain for over 600,000 square miles of land. But not everyone in America shared Seward's enthusiasm for the purchase. Many saw it as a waste of money and resources. The American press dubbed it as Seward's Folly and Seward's Icebox, mocking the secretary for buying a frozen wasteland. Little did they know their skepticism would soon be proven wrong. Despite the public outcry, the sale went through. On October 18, 1867, the Russian flag was lowered in Sitka, Alaska, and the American flag was raised. Alaska was officially an American territory, marking the end of Russia's direct involvement in North America. Seward had taken a gamble, but he believed in the potential of this new territory. Sure, it was a frozen wilderness, but it was America's frozen wilderness now, teeming with untapped resources and countless opportunities. And so, in 1867, Alaska was officially transferred to America for $7.2 million. The deal that was once mocked as folly would soon turn out to be one of the greatest bargains in history. But that's a story for another time. The purchase of Alaska, initially mocked as Seward's folly, soon proved to be anything but a folly. As the dust settled on this historic transaction, the seemingly barren wasteland began revealing its treasures, much to the surprise and delight of its new owners. First came the discovery of gold in the late 19th century. The Klondike Gold Rush turned Alaska into a land of promise, attracting thousands of prospectors and adventurers hoping to strike it rich. Towns sprouted up overnight and the population swelled, bringing a new wave of development and prosperity to the region. But gold was just the beginning. Beneath the rugged terrain and icy waters lay another treasure: oil. In the mid-20th century, large oil and gas reserves were discovered, particularly in places like Prudhoe Bay. This black gold not only brought wealth, but also led to the construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, a marvel of engineering that stretched across the state, creating jobs and bolstering the economy. But Alaska's value extended beyond its natural resources. Its strategic location made it a crucial outpost during World War II and the Cold War. Positioned between the two superpowers of the United States and the Soviet Union, Alaska was a front line of defense and a launch pad for potential counterattacks. Its geographical importance reinforced the perception that the purchase of Alaska was not a folly, but a strategic masterstroke. In the realm of environmental conservation too, Alaska proved invaluable. Its pristine wilderness, from the towering Denali to the sprawling tundra, became a symbol of America's commitment to preserving its natural heritage. Today, millions visit Alaska each year to marvel at its untouched beauty and diverse wildlife, contributing to a thriving tourism industry. In the grand scheme of things, the purchase of Alaska was far from a folly. It was a gamble that paid off, a decision that shaped the course of American history. The $7.2 million spent on Alaska, in hindsight, seems like a bargain. The sale of Alaska is a fascinating chapter in history. The early days of the territory, owned by the distant Russian Empire, were fraught with hardship and isolation. The decision to sell, driven by economic pressures and strategic considerations, led to one of the most significant real estate transactions of the 19th century. The United States, seeing potential in this remote frontier, purchased Alaska for a mere $7.2 million. This transaction had far-reaching consequences, not just for the two nations involved, but for the world. For America, it brought untold wealth in the form of natural resources, opening up new frontiers for exploration and development. For Russia, it was a strategic retreat, a decision that has been questioned and debated ever since. The echoes of this historical event still resonate today, shaping the geopolitical landscape in ways that continue to unfold. So, the next time you look at a map, remember the intriguing story behind that vast landmass in the northwest, Alaska.